picked and chose, pick and picked and Hey, what's up everybody? Ty here with 8 Times Up Outdoors. Just finished cleaning up the boat after a 3-day camping trip at Lake Powell with my wife, and so wanted to do a quick top 7 things for first-time campers at Lake Powell. This was my first trip down where I was leading the trip. We learned a bunch of stuff, so I want to pass that information on to you. Let's get into it. All right, number 1 for the top 7 tips for first-time camping at Lake Powell is to pack well. Light, efficient, especially if you're going on a boat. Obviously, I don't have a very big boat, 16-foot 1970s pontoon boat, not a lot to it. Had to be very selective on what we packed and what we could pack. Just keep in mind as you're packing how you're going to do all that. I'm not going to give you a packing list. If you want one of those, go to wayneswords.net. I'll put a link down in the description as well. It's got everything you need to know about packing. That's the list I based my stuff off of. There was a few things I picked and chose. Some of the things I didn't need to take. So check out that list if you want a full packing list, but do keep in mind not only for the drive down, but once you get down there on the boat, how you're going to be packed. So that's number 1. Number 2 is ice. Ice is a precious commodity when you are fishing at Lake Powell. Even the second weekend of September, we had temperatures over 100 degrees. So figuring out how to keep ice and keep coolers cool if you're going to be there for multiple days is super important. We did a couple of things. One, we froze large 1-gallon things of water, but with that, make sure you do that like 4 or 5 days in advance, even 7 if you can. We put some of ours in the freezer 3 or 4 days in advance, and we had a couple of them that weren't all the way frozen. So just make sure you give yourselves enough time when you're trying to freeze that ice. You want to use as much big cube ice as possible. We went as far to take one of the coolers, fill it up halfway with ice, and put the whole or halfway with water, and put the whole thing in the freezer. So we had this big chunk of ice that we were able to use. We also used our largest cooler. We filled just with ice. So we layered the bottom with 1-gallon jugs full of water that were frozen. Then we put a bunch more quart-size frozen water bottles on top of them, or liter size on top of them. And then we put just bagged ice over all of that, and we were able to use that to refill some of the other coolers throughout the week as they ran out of ice. The drinks cooler that you're in and out all the time, that one's going to go through a lot of ice. Our food cooler, we made sure we kept some ice on it throughout the trip so that the food stayed good, and then we wanted to make sure we had ice to pack the fish on when we came home. So ice is super important. Don't forget the ice. Take it seriously. Figure out how to keep your ice cold and last the entire trip. All right, tip number 3 for camping at Lake Powell is shade. Shade is another thing that is super hard to come by down at Lake Powell, so you may have to get creative. One of the things we did is I bought 2 of these 10-foot conduit poles that actually fit in my seat post. And so the 2 seat posts on the front of the boat, we didn't take those seats because we didn't really need the extra weight or them taking up room. And so we could fit these posts down into those seat poles on the front of the boat. We could beach the boat, and then we just had a shade tarp that we could hook to this and then run out onto the beach. This was perfect for cleaning fish, because we could run in, hit the sand, set this up, put it over the top. I could sit on the front of the boat with my feet in the water, stay cool, clean all the fish right there at the front, throwing the guts into the water, all that kind of stuff. But it just provided super easy shade that you could set up and tear down, which is another thing you want to have, because the wind can wreck just about anything. You can see how bent the poles got, just because they caught some wind on a couple of days. And so make sure you have some sort of shade tent tarp thing, get it figured out, make sure it's tied down well. But shade is also something to keep in mind when you're down at Lake Powell. All right, next up, I don't know what number we're on, 5, 4, which one? Hold on. 4, number 4, we're on 4. Number 4 tip for a first time is picking the campsite. When you go down, you're gonna want to find a flatter area with some sand and beach. There's a lot of big rocks and steep cliffs, so some of the camping can be a little difficult to kind of find. Make sure you find something kind of back in a canyon off the main channel if possible. That will help as well. And do know we launched on a Friday morning really early, and some of the canyons that were closest to Bullfrog were already packed with campers. We couldn't find a camping spot in a couple of them. So if you can launch on a Thursday or an off day, that'll make it easier to find campsites closer to. If you know you're going on kind of a peak weekend, be prepared to drive a ways to be able to find a camp spot. With that, also know your range on your gas tank and monitor that well, so you make sure you have enough fuel to get back to whatever launch place you're going from. We went out of Bullfrog Marina and went about 9 to 10 miles outside of there. I'll put up a map of where we ended up camping and the canyon that was already full. So another thing with campsites to keep in mind is make sure you got some big rocks around you for tying off, which is going to be one of the points coming up here soon. So that's tips on finding a camp spot. All right, next up, tip number 5 is something that a friend told me and I wish I would have listened to a little bit closer. And he was talking about when you beach your boat to make sure you tie off from multiple points. And it became apparent very quick that we were gonna have to be tied off from at least 3 points almost at all times while we were beached at our camp spot. When we went down at first, I was thinking about that advice just for camping at night to make sure everything was tied off well at night. That made sense. What I didn't account for was that in those channels, the canyons that are closest to kind of Bullfrog and those bigger launch points, you're going to get a lot of boats pulling water skiers, wakeboarders, all those kind of things coming by your campsite very often. And so the first day we were there, when we were beached, the boat got tossed around quite a bit because we only had it tied up on one point. Because it was the middle of the afternoon, we weren't going to be there very long, and so we didn't tie it down and then watch the boat get tossed around. And we quickly learned we should tie it down from multiple points at all times. The other thing with that we did learn that worked out super well with my boat is if you have enough rope, take enough rope. Treat it like Boondock Saints. You always got to have rope, right? Is that we had our 3 tie downs ran to the boat and then just could clip them into the boat, and we just left those tied and anchored to the rocks and everything. We got super creative with how to tie them off on those points, which you're probably going to have to do if you go down as well. But then just leave those ropes in place so that when you pull in and park, you can just clip all that stuff in, tighten it down a little, and you're good to go. You don't have to be unhooking and rehooking stuff. That made our life a ton easier once we figured that out. So tie down from multiple points. If you have the rope, leave it connected so you can quickly just come in, park, and get it tied down right away. Tip number 6. Tip number 6 is just to be aware of the main channel and what kind of issues it can present. I have been down to Lake Powell a couple other times. Again, this is the first time I took my boat, and one of the nights we ventured out a little further, and when we came back, the main channel in the evening, which for some reason in Colorado, the afternoon is always when the wind picks up on lakes, and so I figured, in the evening things calm down. That's not true at Lake Powell. In the evening, things can get super dicey. And so when we were driving home on the third night, we got into some serious wind and waves. I mean, the cup holders on the top of this console were full of water because of so much water just coming over the bow and crashing onto the boat. It was miserable, not fun. My wife hated it. So just keep that in mind. Be cautious, know your vessel, whether it can handle those kind of waves or not. This obviously is not really well equipped to handle that kind of wind and waves. So we made sure we kind of stayed in the canyons on the side, except venturing out in the morning into the main channel. So keep that in mind. All right, number 7, and maybe the one everyone's most interested in, is fishing tips. Now, this is my 3rd trip down in the fall to go striper fishing at Lake Powell, which if you have never been fishing in a striper boil, it is one of the most incredible experiences you can have as a fisherman, in my opinion. It is non-stop, fast and furious action. And so that was primarily what we were doing as we were targeting striper boils while we were down there. And so I want to just quickly go over a couple of things that worked really well for us on fishing. Number 1 is this. If you've been around 8 Times Up for a while, you know Chris and I love the Castmaster style lure. This is our 8 Times Up version we sent out to Patreon supporters not too long ago. These Castmaster, silver Castmaster lures are absolutely perfect for striper boils. You can cast them a long ways and get out into the middle of those boils. The silver reflection works great. One other tip, if you're using one of these Castmasters, and you can get even bigger ones. I actually lost my biggest one that I was using while we were down there. But I have a few of these. One of the great tips for these is if you get a striper boil or a boil just stops after the water's erupting and it kind of settles down, you can still throw these into the middle of that striper boil and just let it fall through the water. A lot of times those stripers will think that's a shad that's been hit and is falling through the water, and they'll hit it on that drop. I caught probably 50% of the fish that I caught over those 3 days was using one of these on the drop as it went down through that school, and they would just crush it and they would hit it. I mean, if you miss them, they'll hit it 2 or 3 times, and so you've got a lot of opportunity to get some good fish on throwing one of these out there. Number 2 is one of these Rapala. So this is the Bad Shad 8.5. This thing worked incredibly well. Also, if you can get a little closer to the striper boils, this is a great plug to be throwing into those. It looks a lot like those shad that they're chasing around everywhere. It's got great action, and so you can have a lot of fun fishing with these in the striper boils as well. Another thing over the last few years that we have found that works incredibly well is any of these kind of crawdad style lures that you can use that kind of run along the bottom off of some of those rocky faces. This is going to be more largemouth, smallmouth, maybe some walleyes we've got with these as well. We didn't get to do a lot of that fishing this time. This was not just a fishing trip because I went with my wife. So we, again, primarily focused on striper boils, but if you're looking for kind of a go-to plug for smallmouth, largemouth fishing off kind of rocky points, this can be a great plug. Or if you're more into soft bait, something like this that you can run along the edge as well. Come off some of those. You can see this one got beat up from a couple of fish while we were down there. But something like this can also be a really good tool to use if you're looking to target more of the smallmouth, largemouth down there at Lake Powell. There's a ton of other videos that can give you any more, but I think if I was going to kind of take 3 or 4 lures that I just know are going to work, this would be what I would use. All right, that's it. That's my top 7 tips for first-time camping at Lake Powell. If you have questions, comments, if there's things we missed, if you're an experienced Lake Powell camping person and I missed something completely, please add it to the comments below so we can get everyone filled in on those things. If you use these tips and go to Lake Powell, let me know how it all works. If you haven't, please like and subscribe to this channel so that we can continue to help share information and help each other catch more fish, do better in the world of fishing. And as always, tight lines, cool cans. Until next time, I'm out.